Ladies and gentlemen, this is Nate Crespo, your host for today and forever, and welcome back to another episode of the Lawyers in the Making podcast, where it is my job to focus on the unique journeys to the law and law school of professionals in the legal field and law students. Let's talk about what we're doing today, because today we have another spectacular guest. He's a Gonzaga University School of Law graduate and currently works as the owner of the Longhair Lawyer. He has held past positions as a sales lead of shipping and receiving at REI and as a law clerk at Piskel, Yan, and Koverick. Excited to have him on the podcast today. The long-haired lawyer himself, Mr. Tyler O'Brien. Welcome to the podcast. How are we doing today? Before going any further, I'd like to say a quick word about the sponsor of this podcast, Rhetoric. Back in episode 25, I had the privilege of having the CEO, Luke Yingling, on the podcast, and ever since that episode, fell in love with the product. Rhetoric takes user briefs and motions and compares them against the text of opinions written by judges to identify ways to tailor their arguments to better persuade the judges handling their cases. Rhetoric's focus on persuasion and helps users find new ways to improve their odds of success through more persuasive arguments. Know more, win more. I was able to see a demo of the product, and its cutting-edge technology and fascinating features make for a product I am proud to sponsor, and further shows the new digital era the field of law has been entering thus far on my journey doing this podcast. If you decide to book a demo, let them know Nate sent you. Be sure to check them out in the show notes below or at userhetoric.com. One word, userhetoric.com. Now, back to the show.
Thank you. I'm doing really well, and I love the intro. I love that it touched on my past employment experiences as a retail associate and a law clerk. Not exactly a traditional path to running your own law practice. So it's an interesting place to start.
It absolutely is. And Tyler, that's what we do on this podcast. We talk about the unique journeys. We talk about that there is no straight path to the law, that there's only our unique journeys that we could focus on, that we could cultivate to lead us to success. So I'm happy to have such a unique journey here. And let's go back. Let's start all the way at the beginning. But I have to ask this question first, because you were a laborer worker at 5C Cattle Company. What were you doing there? I have to know.
Yeah, sure. So my first job, I come from a small town, an agricultural community, really. And my first job when I was 16 years old and could drive was to work on a cattle ranch and hay operation for some family friends. So that first job as a laborer and operator, I was operating, driving tractors for harvest, even driving semi trucks, which surprisingly you can do in a lot of states as a 16-year-old without a CDL, as long as it's for an agricultural operation. But doing a lot of different things like that. And then just a lot of physical labor too, building things, putting together sprinkling lines or sprinklers and different stuff of that nature, doing a little bit of light mechanic work under a heck of a lot of supervision. But that was basically my summer job for 4 different summers, maybe 5 different summers between, 16, maybe 22. And then other than that, all my other jobs prior to going into law school were all in labor as well. I did road construction for a county. I worked for an excavation company, which is probably one of my favorite jobs I've ever had. I love being around machinery and digging holes and building things. So I miss that sometimes.
I mean, that's just amazing. Driving semi trucks, it's honestly it's a bit ridiculous, but I love it so much because it's an interesting perspective we're getting here. You're very multifaceted. You like to get dirty with your hands, but you end up going to law school. So you're at Washington State University, you major in political science, and then you end up the next year at Gonzaga School of Law. So simply put, Tyler, why'd you go to law school?
Well, so when I was, but prior to the podcast starting, I know you were talking about your law journey kind of started when you were a junior in high school. Mine did as well. Probably for a variety of reasons, probably largely because I was a smart ass and there were a lot of people telling me I'd make a great lawyer, which by the way, for the folks that are still, not lawyers yet and hear that a lot, it's not a compliment. It's usually not meant to be a compliment. But in any case, I got that a lot. So I knew that for me, law was a potential profession for me. But when I really realized that I wanted to be a lawyer, it was because I saw people within my school district who were kind of abusing their power a little bit. You know, everybody has those teachers that aren't so nice or those administrators that are problematic. It's kind of the nature of public school systems. And it really bothered me when there were students that were unable to didn't really have the means to advocate for themselves when something was being unfairly done to them. So I realized that I could step into that role even as a high school student under some circumstances. And that kind of pushed me toward wanting to be a lawyer because I knew I could be an advocate. The other thing is that all of the men in my family all worked in some facet of construction. My dad's a civil engineer and currently works as a public works director for a county. I have an uncle that basically started off in manual labor and is a superintendent for a drilling company. I have another uncle that's a civil engineer. So there was always this construction type side of things. But aside from the physical labor jobs I had like a little bit more of like an intellectual interest, right? And so when I was 16 and I was a junior in high school, I said to myself, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become a lawyer and then I'm going to work for construction companies. That's what I want to do, you know? And so that basically drove me most of the way through school at Washington State University. I actually started off with a degree in civil engineering, and then I swapped my major to political science, mostly because I had a really hard time with the students in my cohort. And I may just have like lucked out, but I found a lot of the civil engineering students to be really challenging. And I kept telling myself, I'm like, I don't know if I want to work with these people, you know? What's really ironic is I ended up marrying, my wife has a PhD in chemical engineering. So as it turns out, as people grow and mature, or, you know, you just get a broader pool of people, engineers aren't all antisocial and aren't all difficult people. Not that I don't like difficult people. But basically, that kind of prompted my I got partway through school and I was like, you know what, I just want to do something that's interesting with people that like to talk a lot. And so I wrapped up with political science. But the whole time I still had this idea in mind. I'm going to law school. I'm going to, you know, somehow work for construction companies. That's where I was focused at. And then things started to change a little bit as far as my interest once I got into law school, but that's what drove me all the way to that point.
No, I once again, such a fascinating perspective here. And I'd just like to say, my parents too used to tell me like every single time I get in trouble, I'm like putting on an argument. I'm like, no, like this is I'm showing evidence, and they're like, you know what, Nate, you'd be a great lawyer. And I like to talk a lot, so they're like, oh, you'd be so good. So that was one of the big motivations for me thus far in looking into law school and being like, huh, maybe this is for me. And I think your important point, getting those broader perspectives, seeing the world, changing the way that you view things is just so important. It's that growth mindset, which we won't touch on it now, but we could eventually talk about it because it's always inevitable with this podcast that we start talking about the growth mindset. But let's talk about your first year at law school at Gonzaga in 2019. People hate it, people love it. How was it for you?
I loved it. At least for the first semester, I really loved it. I wasn't all that much of an academic as an undergraduate because honestly, like I enjoyed political science courses, but the subjects weren't that difficult. They weren't that challenging, and I kind of have a tendency to rise to the level of what I'm doing. So I was like I had like a 3.01 GPA in undergraduate. I did not go to class very often. I just kind of showed up at the end. But in law school, I found myself for the first time in a position where I was extremely interested in the subject matter and it was incredibly difficult, right? Especially in the beginning. You know, for those who start off law school, I think there's like this 6 to 8 week period where the volume of reading you have to do and the complexity of it all, it feels impossible. It's like trying to learn the first couple chords on the guitar or just something like that that's really complex. It's almost like bashing your head against the wall, like, I'm not gonna understand this. And then after a while, it kind of clicks and you can go back to, you know, skipping class a little bit, a little more like undergrad. But what I'm really getting at though is the subject matter was so interesting that I loved it. And I loved the amount of effort that I had to put in to do it. The other thing that was great though is that for the first time I was surrounded by students who were really interested in that same subject matter and had really similar levels of motivation to me. So it's kind of like for the first time I really got to talk to my classmates in my cohort and be excited about school. I don't know if I'd been excited about school at any point since like second grade. So that was pretty cool for a while. I say my first semester because once I settled in, two things happened. One, it kind of got easier. I understood how I learned. And ooh, sorry, a bug flew by my head.
Good.
I started to gain a strong understanding of how I learned and how I could quickly absorb material. And in some regards, that made it a little more boring because it was less like this constant effort and more of an opportunity to procrastinate a little bit, pay a little less attention in certain things that weren't as beneficial to me. And so some of that drive disappeared. The other thing is I went to law school during the pandemic. And so during my second semester, we actually stopped all in-person classes. There was no reason to go to the law school anymore. So a lot of the socializing piece and a lot of the, discussing these legal topics with other students, that kind of dissipated. And I ended up being, fairly isolated and hit a point where I was like, all right, let's just get this thing done with, keep it moving type of thing. But I really enjoyed the beginning part of law school, and I know I'm maybe a little bit rare in that regard.
No, I mean, I would want to say you're a bit rare, but honestly, historically on this podcast, people like I'd say like 5 or 4 out of 10 people say that they love it, that it was one of their favorite years. But I think just for the reasons that you were saying, that it was a challenge, it was difficult, and you were interested in what you were doing. And I think that's such an important point you're making in terms of playing to your strengths and really knowing yourself, what you want to do and what you strive at doing. I heard you say that, you play to the level that what you're going against. And I think that's such an important point that even I find myself, even throughout school right now, is a lot of the times, like we were talking before, with Thomas Hobbes. I've read Thomas Hobbes like 17 million times, and I know pretty much everything that you could possibly know about him. And it gets a little boring after time. You lose that drive, you stop showing up to class, you're like, oh, I know this stuff already. But being able to find that difficulty, finding that challenge that fits you, that you could excel at and really care to excel at, I think that's such an important point to make. But I have to ask this question because you're coming from such a unique perspective here. How did the sorts of things that you were doing with your hands, that you were doing as a labor worker or as a department assistant at Adams County Public Works, how did those sort of jobs shape your perspective and your experience throughout law school?
Yeah. Well, I think it's really helpful to come in with a broad set of experiences. A lot of folks that well, I don't want to say a lot, but some folks that end up working in the legal profession or in some of these white collar professions have only held jobs that relate to that, right? And it makes it a bit of a challenge without having some outside perspective or some diverse, understanding of different industries that are a little more, low income or a little more hands-on. It's really hard to interact with people from those industries, particularly as clients once you get out of law school. But it's much more challenging to just understand some kind of rudimentary concepts from there. So, like a good example, I suppose, would be when you go, and we won't get too off in the weeds because I know not everybody listening is a lawyer, but there's a course in law school that's required for everyone that's called torts. And a big part, that's where we talk about things like negligence is like half of torts is about negligence. And a big piece of that is determining what sorts of duties of care are owed to people. How does one person act in a reasonable manner reasonable enough that if they cause someone to get hurt, that, nobody's really at fault. That's kind of what we're discussing. A lot of the cases like that, I mean, it's not usually two lawyers who are injuring each other with pens or something. It's stuff that happens in construction. It's car accidents. It's people in a service industry who make a mistake. Being able to quickly kind of identify what that reasonableness standard is it's really helpful to have that kind of background. And so I encountered myself a lot being one of the individuals who had perspective when a professor would say, what's reasonable in this scenario? Or in a property class, because I know so much about agriculture, right? They say, is this 5-acre parcel? Is it a lot of land? I'm a person who can raise my hand and say, actually, no, because this is an agricultural parcel, like a crop circle is 120 acres, So there are a lot of little things that came up like that. I would never say I was a go-to person in law school for knowing the law. But if people wanted to know, is this like a practical thing that might happen in an industry? I usually, and still to this day, have a pretty good understanding of that and a pretty easy time gaining an understanding of new fields, particularly when working with a client. So it's been very helpful.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. I have to talk about my time working at ShopRite. I worked in the produce department, and honestly, it was it's been and still is the best job I've ever had before, because it really showed me how to talk to people, how to solve problems for people. Like, where are the avocados? I have to know where the avocados are in order to make sure the customer is satisfied. So it's little things like that, even greeting people, people coming up to him like, "Hi, how you doing?" Just those little things, those soft skills that I was able to develop at ShopRite were just so important and integral to what I do now, and who I am as a person, and the type of perspectives that I have, that I'm able to take a step back and view things from sort of an objective view of like, okay, I've been here before. Like, there's these small disputes. What do we do? How can we figure it out? And you could
Yeah.
apply it to law school. And when you get there, you could share those perspectives and be able to have a much easier time sort of understanding things. Because, like you said, it's very, very challenging to understand. It's like learning the guitar, it's like learning a new language. But I have to ask, can you talk a little bit about soft skills, how important they've been to you, and maybe describe what soft skills are for those people who may not know what they are?
I'd love to talk about that. I think right now there's probably a little bit of a battle over what the definition of soft skills mean. I see it on LinkedIn all the time, and I'm a person that says it too, that we need an emphasis on soft skills in law school in particular, and that there should be something being done there. But a lot of folks just say soft skills and then leave it at that. When I'm talking about soft skills, the main skill I'm talking about is empathy. And when I say empathy, I'm not talking about feeling sorry for people or literally embodying the feelings of others. I'm talking about being capable of understanding why another person feels a certain emotion. And in particular, what's particularly advantageous is being capable of understanding other people's motivations and what they want in life. It's not a skill that everyone has and everyone is born with. We all have some inherent capacity to understand empathy, but I really do believe that even people who struggle with it are capable of learning the skill and developing it. Because really, ultimately, even people who are very empathetic, and I call myself one of those people, we can't read minds. It is not a perfect skill. You will be wrong at times, and there are mistakes you can make, by virtue of thinking that you have this perfect understanding of the world and know everything. That's not what we're going for. But what we're really talking about is being able to understand how most people's, a mix of behavioral characteristics, facial expressions, body language, combined with the particular situation that they're in, the social hierarchy of a given institution or profession or whatever it might be, looking at all those things and just trying to say, okay, how is this person going to behave? Predicting behavior, and then seeing behavior and figuring out why. That it's so important. And especially particularly going into law school, there is law school is hyper competitive, right? But a lot of folks going into it don't really understand why fully, and also don't recognize the implications of that on the behavior of other students. That's the biggest thing for people going into law school and the legal profession that I think is important, is understanding why other people act the way I do. And I know that, or the way they do. And I know I rambled on. I could probably give a 2-hour monologue on this subject, so I don't want to derail us too much. But yeah, soft skills, empathy. That's what I'm talking about.
I am so happy I asked that question. I'll be honest with you, Ty. Like that was like one of the greatest things I think I've ever heard in my life. Hon- Honestly, like it just further shows something that I love to talk about on this podcast is that the human aspect of the law. You go to law school, you're taking plain text, you're applying the plain text to the rules of the law, and you're just going back and forth and you're looking through these books and you're reading all these cases. But the soft skills, the practical knowledge that you need when you go out there in the world doesn't really exist in law school. And obviously, I've never been there, but I've talked to a couple people, unfortunately enough, about their law school experiences, and they've overwhelmingly told me it's becoming such a constant theme. It's kind of crazy on this podcast how many times that people harp on it, just like yourself, how important these soft skills are when you go out there in the real world, because the practical knowledge is not always cultivated there. But I think to your point as well, just the fact that it is a skill, that it can be built up, that it can be improved on, and it could be, I don't want to say perfected because it will never be perfect, but to the nearest possible degree, it can be grown over time. And I think that's such an important point you make.
Yeah. And I think for people who I keep saying that, people keep saying be more empathetic. And it's not super helpful. I think for the people who really want to develop empathy as a skill, either because, I don't know, they want to become the master manipulators of the world, or just because they struggle with it and they want to have better social interactions. If you're a person who really struggles with it, the best thing you can do is find someone who has the skill, who is very empathetic, who typically could guess at a person's social motivations and usually get it right, Then, and I know that's a tough ask, because asking a person who's not very empathetic to recognize who is and make friends with that person, that's a lot. And I understand that's a lot. But if you can do that, what you can do is when you encounter a social situation that doesn't quite make sense, you can basically play a game of guess and check. You can say to your empathetic friend, I think that this person said that because of reason X. And maybe you're right. Or maybe that empathetic friend is like, no, 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 that's not even close. Like, this is the real reason. And basically, by going through that, you'll begin to gain the ability to recognize some of these different social cues that we're talking about. And like I said, not everybody has an equal capacity for this. There's definitely a spectrum, and especially, if we talk about neurodiversity, which by no means am I an expert of any kind on, people all enter this in different places, but I have to believe that it is something that everyone can develop to some extent.
Yeah, I think something you said there that was really important is looking for people that are very empathetic, looking for people that are very good at the skill and that excel at it. I know myself, my brother is very good at being empathetic, and I learned so much from him in terms of social skills to be able to look at him just like as we're talking to other people, like I'm not in a weird way, but I'm like analyzing him as he's doing it. So I'm like, what is he doing that I'm not doing, and how can I adjust what I'm doing? And I think as well, not to get philosophical. Sorry, I have to do this. One of my favorite quotes I've ever read. It's from Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince, but he talks about how every single prince learned from the last one. So like, Caesar learned from Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great learned from Cercio, and so on and so forth. And I think it just further shows that message that if you're looking to improve something, if you're looking to cultivate something, go find the people who are the best at doing it. The best of the best, the top of the crop. So you can sort of cultivate that same thing because clearly they're doing something right and you could do it right too. I fully believe that. Everyone is capable of doing that. But not to switch gears a little bit. You were a law clerk at Piscal, Yan, and Kovaric. Did I say?
That's a tough one. It's Piscal, Yaney, Kovarek.
All right.
And my joke, and hopefully they don't take offense to it, because I don't know if I've ever said the joke to them, but the joke was always that they met at a bad names convention.
I mean,
But yeah.
with my struggling of the name, I might have to agree with that. But can you talk about that experience? And
Yeah.
yeah, just talk about that experience.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I suppose for those that are still thinking about law school, I'll kind of describe the OCI hiring process really quick. OCI stands for on-campus interview. It's still probably the most common way that law students get their summer internships, at least at most law schools. And I didn't actually, COVID put a wrinkle in my OCIs, my 1L year. So I didn't end up with an internship my 1L year. But coming out of my 2L year, I got an internship. I became a law clerk in my state, a licensed legal intern, which basically most states you pass the MPRE, which is the ethics portion of the bar exam. You basically take it well in advance of the bar exam. And then you can act as a licensed legal intern. You can give people legal advice and essentially be an attorney under the supervision of another attorney. So I got that position. I started in May at Piskel Yaney Kovarik, which is a boutique litigation firm in Spokane. I chose them over another one because they were a construction focused litigation firm. So I ended up with I'm testing waters, getting this job I want. And I stayed with them from May. I worked full time during what ended up being my last semester of law school, and worked with them from May. Took a little time to study off with the bar, and then ended my position with them in May. And I guess just to give you an idea of the type of work I was doing there, I started off doing a couple research memos because that's kind of how they test the waters with their new associates. You'll kind of find that everywhere. And then drafting some pleadings, which when I say pleadings, I basically just mean anything that's filed in court. And then started handling some bigger motions, some arbitration things, and really took on a lot of responsibility for litigation drafting. I didn't ever, at no point did I actually go, I attended court a couple times, but at no point did I do any presentation. That just wasn't, they figured out I was pretty good at writing, and so they had me keep writing. But what was cool was throughout my time there, I was able to carve out a little bit of a niche for myself in doing transactional work. So essentially drafting contracts and reviewing contracts, helping with some negotiation there. And I realized that that's what I liked the most. So I was able to get a lot of that work because they were predominantly a litigation firm, and a lot of people weren't interested in it. And I essentially begun to develop that skill set and was kind of able to take on more and more responsibility there as that went on. They did offer me an associate position after the fact, which I think technically I may have accepted. My girlfriend at the time, who was my fiance a week later, we're married now. She got a job she finished up school, got a job down in California. So basically, as soon as I got offered that position, it was like, oh, well, we're moving out of state. Sorry, I'll have to find, something else to do. So I sat for the California bar exam, and then around that time, I decided I wanted to start my own practice, and that's how I ended up here.
Well, first I have to say congratulations on having such a wonderful wife.
Thank you.
I'm a little
I'm
late.
very happy.
So sorry, a little late, but I always like to get the congratulations in. I feel inclined to. I'd love to have a wife one day myself. But I think what I'm wondering here is, so you move out of the state and you end up being a sales associate at REI, and then being the sales lead camp department, and then
Yeah.
being sales lead of shipping and receiving. So what happened there?
Yeah. I'm happy to explain that. So basically, when I realized we were moving to California, I had a couple of different decisions to make. One of them was whether or not I was going to take the California bar exam, because technically I was already a licensed attorney in Washington, and theoretically I could serve Washington clients completely remotely, and I could maybe do that. The problem is that because remote practice is still relatively new, the American Bar Association, which creates the model rules of ethics, and the states involved haven't really clarified what constitutes the unauthorized practice of law in a circumstance like that. The shortest way to explain it is there is a question as to whether, if I was living here in California and just serving Washington clients, the California Bar Association might have a problem with that. And basically, because it's an ethical gray area and I was going to live here anyway, I'm like, well, I'll take some time off, I'll study again, and I'll take the California bar exam. So that got me to July 28th of that year. In the meantime, I decided I wanted to go out on my own. But I was going to have to wait until at least December to get my license in California, which, conceivably I probably shouldn't be advertising myself, legal services and all of that until that point in time. So I've got this 8-month window. Who wants to hire an attorney for an 8-month window, right? The other thing was, I mean, I conceivably could have just applied for some associate positions down here and lied and said, "Oh yes, I'd love to stay with your firm forever. Put me on the partnership track." And I very well possibly could have gotten a job that way, but I just didn't feel good about that. Particularly because I'd be spending time setting up my own law practice in the background. So there's kind of a question of whether it's really ethical for me to compete with them. Like, would they be worried I was stealing all their forms or things of that nature? So just like, I'm not doing it. But in the meantime, I can't just take, 8 months off of life and make no money. So it's like, what is something I could do that I would really enjoy? And I'm a very outdoorsy person. I go backpacking and hunting, and that's been a huge part of my life since the beginning. So I looked around and I was like, I've always loved going into REI. Shout out to the REI store in Spokane, Washington, which is great. But I was like, oh, let's just see if I can get a job there. Like, I'm sure I can get a job. I've got the background for this. So I applied and got a job, as you said, as a sales associate. They tested the waters with me for about 2 weeks, and they were like, oh, we like this guy. So they promoted me to be in charge of the camp department. And kind of like you were talking about how you loved working at the grocery store, I loved working at REI. The people there were so nice. Everyone was just really kind in a way that you don't really encounter in the other industries I've worked in. There's a lot of harsh people in agriculture and construction and law, which is fine. I respect those industries. I still participate in them in certain ways, but it was just different. So I really loved it. It was super interesting. I loved, helping little old ladies find gloves so they could go on their Arctic adventure or trekking poles, or, helping people get ready to go check the PCT. It was really cool. After a certain period of time, I felt like I basically put some different procedures and protocols in place to make the camp department hopefully run a bit more efficiently. And I felt I could do that in a different department. So I ended up in transferring over to sales lead and shipping and receiving, which was really cool because I found ways to. I definitely won't go into the details because it'd be super boring and off the rails at this point, but I found some ways to kind of make these three software services communicate with each other in a way where I was able to track where some of our basically like lost sales and inventory issues and stuff were happening. And it was a really fun investigative project. But then I hit the point where it's like, well, my law firm thing's taken off. I should probably go back to being a lawyer, which I enjoy just as much. So
I couldn't agree more. I always say one day I will return to ShopRite to be a produce associate again. I swear it's my destiny. It is so my destiny. And suddenly I wasn't doing anything with software, but there was all these fridges of like these pre-made salads. And so we always got huge packages of salads every day. So one day I took the time and I reorganized the entire thing. So every single thing was in perfect tip-top shape. And I'm pretty sure the last time I went there, it's the same exact way. So I was happy to see that. I was like, oh my God, like my work is still up here. It's like my work of art. I was like, wow, this is beautiful. Look at all the salad. Um,
I know. I know exactly what you mean. I went into that same REI store the other day and I saw that some handmade like price stickers that I put together for this display of climbing equipment was still mine. It was still my handwriting, which I was like, man, it's been a year and they haven't raised the prices. I mean, go REI, way to look out for the little guy, but I know the feeling you're talking about.
it's such a wonderful experience sometimes. But let's talk about the long hair lawyer. So what do you do there? You got a wonderful hat that people can't see it, but you got a wonderful hat. I love the merchandise. I want my own merchandise one day, one day. But you talk about what you're doing at the long haired lawyer, and yeah, talk about.
Yeah, so I guess just to give a little background into the brand, because that's what stands out the most to people. You like you said, you can't see me. I have quite long hair, and basically that was never intended to be some grandiose fashion statement. It was just while I was in law school, I started to grow my hair out a little bit, and time again, I had people come up to me and say, "Oh wow, you're gonna have to cut your hair to be a lawyer, you know, like when are you going to do that so you can get a real job? And it just made me feel more and more rebellious about it, I guess. I got to a point where I was just like, this really doesn't matter. I don't know what you guys are talking about. Um, so that was a small piece of it. The other piece was is that the legal industry, there's a lot of agents of change out there, but by and large, it's pretty old fashioned and it's pretty stuffy. There are some people who are not very kind and not very approachable. And lay people, the folks that seek legal services know that. That's why there's so many negative images associated with attorneys. And essentially, I didn't want to be associated with that in any way. I wanted people to know that I thought that being an attorney is about collaborating with people, not about acting better than them. And ultimately, the long hair lawyer became my way of making it immediately apparent to people that I'm a little different in some ways that I think are important. So that's kind of how the brand came together. For me, I know I've kind of mentioned I have a little bit of a background in litigation, but I like transactional law. At this point, most of what I do is transactional law. Because I'm still relatively new to practice, there's quite a variety of things that come my way. And I kind of, to some extent, as a new business owner, I take what I can get. So it's not like I've niched down into something specific, like I only do commercial real estate transactions, or I only do commercial leases, or I only do employment contracts. At this point in time, if you have something and it involves a contract, I probably have some understanding of how it all works, and I will take you on as a client. What's cool about my practice, what I think is especially cool about my practice right now, is that I have a lot of leeway to take on small projects where other attorneys won't. If you think about it, there's a pretty high administrative cost to onboarding a client at even a boutique firm that has like 7 attorneys and 3 paralegals. It's people are getting paid for their time, and it takes a certain amount of time to set up a matter, right? So if you call an attorney and you call one of those firms and you only have, an issue that's going to take 2 or 3 hours, or maybe even more than that, it's probably not in the firm's financial interest to take it on. In my case, I've been able to set things up in a manner where it's pretty efficient, where I can get people through this entire engagement process where they've met with me, we've done a conflict check, we've sent an engagement letter out, and sent a trust deposit out, which basically is the whole onboarding process. I can get people through that in a matter where it only takes like 30 minutes, at least of my time. Maybe it takes a couple of days to get it all together, but it's pretty quick. So, I'm willing to take on small issues and advise people on little things. And I really enjoy that because it's serving and it's basically assisting an underserved community, but it's also great as a business model because people are like, oh, it was so nice of you to help me review my employment contract. I know I only paid you $60 for it. I think that's super reasonable. It only took 20 minutes, whatever. And so then they come back because they need a trust drafted, or they refer me business from their employer, that type of thing. So I'm super happy with it. The term in the legal tech industry would be that my practice is very agile right now. I'm able to be very, very flexible and very quick with things and adapt quickly. And again, feel like I'm rambling, but I love what I do. So
Well, first, I have to say it is a fantastic and wonderful thing that you love what you do and you love what you do every day, because I think that's such an important point for people to hear. You got to go out, you got to find those things that you love and be able to do it over time and be able to love it over time. So first, that's always amazing. But I have to ask this question because when I did the podcast with Patrick Bettino, you're wearing the Newfangled Lawyer podcast shirt right now, so shout out to them. But he had spoke extensively about redefining professionalism, just like yourself with your long hair. So can you talk about the redefinition of professionalism in your eyes going forward in the legal industry?
Yeah. So for me, when I put my business together, I have a little bit of a business administrative background. So I have like a minor in business administration, and one of my really good friends is a CPA who knows all things business. But what I'm getting at is I knew I needed to start off with a business plan, and that business plan needed to start off with mission, vision, and values. And what's become the most important thing to me is my vision, which I slipped it in earlier actually without you knowing, but it's to make the world realize that being an attorney is about collaborating with people and not acting better than them. That, I think, is the starting point of redefining professionalism in our industry specifically. Because ultimately, that's a real tendency throughout our industry, and people recognize that. It's a cultural issue at large law firms. I've seen it all over LinkedIn. People really sticking up for themselves, but some of the big law lawyers who have like great salaries and great jobs, they really don't have very much disposable income because they have to buy fancy suits and fancy cars and Rolex watches. And I know I say have to, um, uh, because some people do that. Obviously, they don't have to. There's nobody forcing them. But the social implications at some of these places, and it's all changing for the better. I talked to a big law lawyer the other day. I think it's getting better, but that the social implications of not being that type of chauvinistic participant, it's pretty negative for people. And basically, if we want to repair and heal ourselves as an industry and make people actually want to seek our services instead of avoiding us as long as humanly possible, we need to be approachable. And approachable means meeting people where they're at and not acting as if you're better than them by virtue of your education or status or wealth or whatever it might be. So for me, that's number one: approachability, collaboration. That's what we need.
I think that's wonderfully said, and I think to your point, it is so important to be approachable. It is so even just from a business perspective. I know probably people out there when they go to get an attorney, they're probably afraid to call them because it will probably cost them a buck or two. And I think being able to remove that stigma, it's a slow burn. Most things are, but you're one of those people. Patrick is one of those people taking that one step at a time, putting that message out there, making sure people are aware of it. So I love that. I love the movement. I'm so into it. But I have to be honest, I love wearing a suit. A little. I think
I absolutely love wearing a suit too. And there is nothing wrong with that. I mean, that's the thing too. It's like, I've taken a very like contrarian, extreme approach to setting myself apart, but I don't think everybody needs to do that. It's actually like I was talking with Patrick on the Newfangled Lawyer podcast, and one thing we discussed was, virtual law practice and how feasible that is. And the reality is, for some people, it's really important to them to be in the same room face to face as someone else, even when they don't need to be, and to shake their hand. And, obviously that's not the type of business that I'm setting up, but there's nothing wrong with being that type of person. I'm not mad at, a New York litigator that like has a fancy watch. I'm not trying to fight against that or anything. It's really just more of a matter of our behavior more so than anything else needs to be approachable. But yeah, wear a suit every day if you want to.
I mean, I might have to take you up on that. I might start wearing a suit every day. But I think staying on the topic here, staying on this new era of law, because that's what I've been seeing the entire time I've done this podcast. It seems that the legal industry is moving in a certain way. We're on the precipice of this new era, and technology is a very big part of it. AI technology, products that can help you become more efficient, cut that overhead. So what are some products or services that you're using right now, either that be AI or just some new generation stuff that's helping you in your practice? Sort of like the tech stack question, if I wanted to get exact here.
Yeah. My tech stack isn't all that extreme, but it really doesn't have to be. There are some fairly sophisticated tools, and what you'll find, I'll tell you all about it in a second, but what you'll find is that a lot of firms are really, really way far behind. If you have an online intake form and you have a client relationship management system, you are miles ahead of most of the law firms in this country right now. So for me, for my practice management system, I use Clio. And Clio Manage is the practice management portion, and then Clio Grow is the client relationship management portion. And for those who are unfamiliar, client relationship management, or CRM, you'll hear marketers call it CRM all the time. That's kind of like your onboarding software. It's what tracks leads. In my case, it's where I house my engagement letters and some different things that are pieces of that onboarding process. But that is a term that has grown in popularity a lot. And, if you're in any kind of business, at some point you're gonna hear that the same way that we hear POS, and that means point of sale, right? So what's cool about Clio, I will say Clio Grow is not a particularly extremely customizable tool. But as a solo practitioner, it is really simple and straightforward, and it's easy for me to set up task lists and go about stuff. It's customizable enough for my purposes, and it saves me a ton of time. So that's probably the most interesting, sophisticated thing I have, and it's not particularly sophisticated, right? I use Microsoft Outlook, probably just because I'm used to it from the university system, but I use basically the whole Microsoft package for everything, including cloud storage. I also have a subscription to all Adobe applications, which as an attorney, you have to have some type of PDF editor. That's really important. But I actually also use Premiere Pro to edit some of my content for marketing purposes and stuff like that. I also, because I've started my own podcast too, I use Riverside to record those podcasts. So that one's kind of interesting. But everything else is pretty standard. I have a legal research platform that's LexisNexis. LexisNexis and Westlaw are largely have the same offerings. Westlaw is kind of a little nicer, in my honest opinion. It's more comfortable to use. It's like the Cadillac of legal research platforms. But LexisNexis offers almost everything's the same, and it's much cheaper. They also have some really interesting and valuable technology as far as searching dockets. I kind of think is better. Doing kind of skip trace searches on people, if you have access to that portion of their platform, I find them a little more valuable in that way. So that's why I'm with them. For the people who haven't heard anything really cool yet, or just want to know if I use AI or not, whatever that might mean to you, I have played around with ChatGPT, trying to get it to draft documents, and largely found that it's not particularly useful. If I get it to do a very small task, it can come up with some sort of a draft that I can then particularly drafting like a single clause in a contract or a single cause of action in a complaint that's supposed to be filed. It'll get me something that has a baseline, and then I can try and improve it from there. But that in particular is not very useful. Both LexisNexis and Westlaw, I believe, have both recently come out with some AI legal reading or legal writing options. I've yet to really play around with those much, but they're probably going to be better. But I'm equally skeptical of how well it's going to pan out. So,
No, I think that was a very substantial list. You had a lot in there, and I think it will be very helpful for people out there who have their own practices or practice law themselves, or even those law students going forward in time, that there are those products out there that can help them and support them. I always say my tech stack is just Grammarly. I love Grammarly. More than anything on this world, I love Grammarly.
I actually forgot that. I just have like the free version of Grammarly plugged in. I'm pretty sure I've had it plugged in for like 6 years, and I just haven't had to think about it again, but I use Grammarly a lot. Sometimes when I'm trying to post on LinkedIn, I get a little irritated with it because I'm very informal in the way I talk there, and it's constantly trying to make me sound more sophisticated. I'm like, no, I want to be less sophisticated, but otherwise Grammarly is great.
It's the goat. It's the goat. I have to say, it's one of the greatest things I've ever found. I got it all the way back in high school, and I was like, wow, like this is transformative. But fourth to last question here, Tyler. Official on the Lawyers in the Making podcast, Tyler O'Brien, what are your book recommendations for people out there? Doesn't have to be about the law, just some of your favorite books, something you give a gift to someone.
Oh, that's so interesting. something that happens to a lot of people when they go to law school is the pleasure of casual reading goes away. And that kind of that kind of happened to me. I've only read one book like for pleasure since law school. So before that, I was quite a reader. One thing that's really interesting, the last book I read before law school is called The Last Days of Night. And I think it's a really good book. I don't know how accurate it is as so sorry, let me backtrack. So it's about the battle for the patent of the light bulb, which went on between Nikola Tesla, Thomas Edison, and George Westinghouse. And it's told from the perspective of the attorney that represented George Westinghouse at the time. Now it's a historical fiction, which makes it even, it's a lot of it's probably not real, but it's way more fun. Thomas Edison is practically like a mad, evil genius. Nikola Tesla is, accurately quite eccentric. It's a really fun book. But yeah, I definitely recommend that one. What I was gonna say is, since I haven't read it since going through law school, for the attorneys listening, I don't know whether it's accurate in any way at all. Another thing law school will do is it will take like all of the joy out of watching any television or listening to podcasts or stuff that try to represent the way the law works, because they get it wrong all the time, and it's really frustrating. But I would definitely recommend that book. I'm also writing a book. It's a work in progress. I won't even tell you what the title is, but come like next August or so, I definitely recommend folks look for what that is and and read that one.
Well, that is very exciting. Congratulations on that. I mean, that's big stuff right there. I'd love to write a book one day. What would I write about? No idea. Still figuring that out. I got a bit of time here, so I'll be fine. But can you give a sneak peek? A little sneak peek?
I don't know. I'm not sure if I can really give a sneak peek. How about this though? How about this?
Okay.
Some of the things that we talked about in terms of empathy and in terms of soft skills, there will be a pretty big emphasis on that in this book. So it is going to be something that is a kind of like a how to succeed of sorts, that really just emphasizes how to get through life without getting trampled on, and also without being the person that's doing the trampling. That's kind of how I would sum it up.
Well, I love that sneak peek. I'm very excited now. I hope I would think folks out there are very excited now for this new book. You got me revved up and excited right now. But
Well, good. I'm glad someone is other than me. Very
but third to last question here, Tyler. What are the sorts of things that you consume, not food, consume on a daily basis, either that be through social media, so Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, YouTube, Reddit, Substack, any podcasts that you listen to that you would recommend to people, any people that you read on a daily basis that you enjoy a lot and would recommend. What's crossing the transom of Tyler's mind on a daily
Yeah.
basis?
Yeah, that's interesting. Really, at this point, it's a lot of LinkedIn. If you want to just like project yourself into my mind, connect on me with LinkedIn and start sending messages. There are a lot of really insightful, interesting people on there, just more than I can even name, several of whom you've had on your podcast. So, yeah, I really gain a lot from that. I do read the news every day. What I actually do is I go to Google and then I Google the word news. I found that's the best way to get an fairly unbiased spread of most of what's going on in the world. So I kind of do that on a daily basis. When it comes to educating myself on topics outside of the law, really spend a lot of time on YouTube. I've learned so much in the past, over the past year. Well, in the past couple weeks, it's been stuff about guitar that I've learned on YouTube. But I've gained so much knowledge about nutrition, weightlifting, running, cycling, swimming, outdoor equipment, all this stuff. Mechanics, everything you could think of, I guess. A ton of my knowledge comes from watching YouTube videos. So don't knock it till you try it. It's actually a really good resource if you go about it in a focused manner and you try to stay away from the shorts. So that's how I spend my spare time these days when I'm not doing like physical activities, I guess, or practicing law.
Those damn shorts. those damn shorts. They'll
I know
get
they get you.
they'll hook you in, and you're like, oh, I'm not getting. But I have to say, I love YouTube so much. I've pretty much learned everything that I had to do the podcast. A lot of video editing stuff, actually. I learned pretty much everything on YouTube. In the past, I've learned everything on YouTube. Actually, this is the short story, but when I was in like second grade, didn't know how to tie my shoes, and my mom made me sit on the couch till I was done tying my shoes. I couldn't leave the couch, and she was making me try to do it like the bunny ears way. But I was actually showing someone yesterday, but I tie my shoes in like a really, really weird way because I got it from some random YouTube video, and it's just what I do every day. So YouTube integral to my life, clearly integral to your life. It's a wonderful thing. Internet is a wonderful thing also. There's so much information out there. I could go on for days. But
Yeah, it is. I mean, if you just think about the vast exposure we have to any information we want at any point in time. I know a lot of folks have concerns over what's real and what's not, and that's a very legitimate concern. It's something you should watch out for. But on the whole, I really like the exposure that we have, and the fact that I can gain an understanding of things that are completely foreign to me in a very quick amount of time in a way that people couldn't, 5, 10, 15 years ago even. It's incredibly valuable and changes our lives mostly for the better.
oh, always, always. You just got to make sure you're looking at the right stuff. And I think just as well, to your point, we live in the craziest time ever. There's never been this much information available to you. And I think the entire human history, since the existence of humans, there's never been so much information out there. So it's a great time to be alive in this current moment because you got so much out there, so much to learn. It's such a wonderful thing. I could literally go all day. But second to last question here. You're working at your practice, you're making content, making LinkedIn posts, doing your podcast. But what does an ideal Friday night and Sunday morning look for Tyler?
Sunday morning. Well, man, honestly, my ideal Friday night right now, and it's probably just because I've been cooped up for the winter, would be to spend it at the top of a mountain. I really I really love backpacking, and I really like being deep in the woods alone, or maybe with a family member, maybe with my dogs, but like, you know, going through that kind of feat. And because I've been kind of cooped up all winter, that's all I've been thinking about. I'm actually going to Washington, which is where I grew up. I don't know if we covered that, but I grew up in Eastern Washington. I'm going there next week and going to take a couple days off and hopefully do some hiking. I might even just grab my tent and go like, I don't know, a couple thousand feet up in the mountains and then just spend the night up there. So right now, that's the case. I spend a lot of time with my wife. A typical Friday night usually ends up looking like us going to the gym and then maybe going out to a restaurant or maybe going having a drink later. As far as the Sunday morning goes, usually Sunday is like a day of total relaxation for me. It's the only day of the week that I don't have like a planned, scheduled physical activity. Maybe sometimes I'll go indoor rock climbing on a Sunday, but otherwise I just like lounging around and hanging out. I've got 2 dogs who I really like spending time with them. So
Yeah, I mean, wow, rock climbing's crazy. But I think even crazier is you going up into those mountains and staying in a tent for the whole night. I'd actually want to try that. I'm actually very interested in that. I have to be honest. The whole
you
hiking
should.
thing just started to get into it really. And honestly, it's amazing. Nature's so wonderful, and the
It
views,
is.
especially something that gets swept under the rug. You think about New York, you think about New York City, you think about the biggest city in the world, but people forget upstate New York, that's the Adirondacks. It is beautiful up here. It honestly is. It's so underrated. And I've actually seen Washington State. I went there when I was a sophomore in college because me and my family had went to Alaska, and so we had to go to Washington first, and then we were supposed to take a train, but the train got canceled, so we had to take a bus through the entirety of Washington State from Seattle to Vancouver. So I've seen a lot of Washington State, interesting enough. And it is beautiful, and it's something I would love to stay there for a couple of weeks, see what's going on. But Tyler, last question of the podcast. I do this at the end of every podcast. What are your words of wisdom for the aspiring law students, the current law students, and the legal professionals out there in the world?
Well, for the For the aspiring law students and the current law students, I think I don't know if I really call it words of wisdom, but you should just know that you are entirely capable of getting through law school and you're entirely capable of passing the bar. I think that we place so much emphasis on knowledge that we act in our industry. I mean, that we act as if people who don't have knowledge are dumb. And that's not the case at all. Like, you are going to, if you apply yourself, you're going to get through all of this coursework. You are going to graduate from law school. You are perfectly capable of it. The idea that you're dumb because you're a 1L and you just haven't been exposed to these things for long enough, it's silly. So just, if you can, try to drive that out of your heads. And, as you get older, don't perpetuate the system. The same is true for the bar exam. And I know there are some pretty substantial changes coming to the bar exam in a lot of different states. I'm a proponent of that. I'm a proponent of alternatives to the bar exam. I know it's especially challenging for people that basically have a lot of test anxiety, and there's some things to combat there. But as far as actually learning the material and being capable of passing that test, I'm here to tell you that you can do it. There's a lot of professors who, as you go through school, you'll hear people say, like, yeah, well, you're only a lawyer if you pass the bar. In reality, the majority of people pass the bar. It happens. They act as if there is, in the legal industry, what we call a rebuttable presumption that you'll fail. Like, we're assuming you fail until you prove otherwise. And we should really change that around. We should assume that you're going to pass until you don't, right? So for those folks, I just say, like, just keep working. The things will come to you if you take the right steps, and you're certainly capable of it. For the people who are in the legal profession, especially the people who, there are a lot of folks who feel pretty down on themselves pretty often. I would just say that, you do have some amount of freedom to change. Whether that's change your own behavior, whether that's leave a career that you don't like, or just something else in your life, you really can decide to choose. You really can pivot and make things for the better. So a lot of folks, I've felt this way at times in my life. I see a lot of people, and it's not just in the legal industry, it's in everything, like large corporations, consulting, accounting, being a hairstylist, it doesn't matter what. A lot of people get this idea that they've worked at something for a really long time to be in this super particular field. And then they just feel as if they somehow owe it to themselves or their parents or the universe or whoever it is, that they have to keep grinding away, being miserable until their 401k is full and they're retired. And that's not the case. You can quit. You can pivot. You can move to a different state. And obviously there's a lot of, different familial obligations and monetary obligations and things people are worried about. But I'm just here to tell you that you are not stuck. And if you're miserable doing something, you really, truly can pivot and can change if you decide to. And my hope is, if you feel that way, that's something that you will do, So that's my limited words of wisdom for, coming from someone who certainly does not have everything figured out, but hopefully it helps somebody.
I thought it was beautifully said. Tyler, you're speaking to the choir. You're speaking to what we talked about on this podcast, that there is no straight path. That is only your unique journey. You can pivot. You can do whatever you want. Do what you love. Find what you're passionate about. And that's what you should pursue. But that's the podcast, Tyler. So thank you so much for coming on here, spreading your wisdom, spreading your experiences. And for everyone out there listening, thank you for tuning in. And check us out, lawyersinthemaking.substack.com. Lawyers in the Making, one word, substack.com. And I will see you in the next one.